This is Calvin Castine. Welcome to this week's edition of North Country Commerce, a weekly look at people and places of interest in and around the Plattsburgh North Country Chamber of Commerce viewing area. Gary Douglas may or may not be here before this show is completed. We're going to take a look at some of the unique automobiles here at this third annual Great American Car Show here as we compete with Jody Parks for the sound here. She's announcing on-field announcer. We'll take a look at some of the more unique vehicles here for this third annual car show here at the park facilities, and invite you to show up next year to enjoy these in person. We'll be taking a brief look at several of the vehicles that are here for this year's car show. No particular rhyme or reason, just that they caught my eye. So we might be skipping some of your favorites, and the way to remedy that is to show up next year and take this in for yourself. We're starting with this 1950 Chevrolet because this is a car that, not this particular one, but this model, the 1950 Chevy Deluxe. A black one at that is the type of car I've spent many hours in. As a youngster growing up, my parents had a 1950 Chevy Deluxe, and it was black. So this car brings back a lot of fond memories for yours truly. This one here is owned by Donald Favreau of Plattsburgh, and it's a second owner car, 100% original, and it was purchased at LC Bowles Incorporated on Court Street. Phone number was 121 if you wanted to call back then to buy a car. So the 1950 Chevy Deluxe is the first car we're looking at today. The music in the background provided by Lake City DJ Service is going to make it look like we're filming American Graffiti here, make it sound like we're filming American Graffiti, the movie. It's a 1954 four-door Dodge, and it's owned by Morris and Gladys Devereaux from Plattsburgh. And it is blue. Got the wide white walls. And behind it, almost directly behind it, is another car that's important to me. Again, not this particular one, but the first new car I ever bought was a 1966 Ford Fairlane I bought from Rao Brothers in Ellenburg. That was back when Buster Roberts was selling cars for them. Of course, Morris's brother Ron Roberts now owns Riley Ford in Chazy. But red, this here looks a little like it might be the original color. It's out of Vermont, as you can see. The original red one I had was candy apple red, and this one looked like it maybe 35 years ago, maybe this was candy apple red also, but it's kind of gotten a little faded in the meantime, so it might be original paint on that one. And again, it's out of Vermont. And I suppose we should point out this 1950 two-door Ford Deluxe. And it looks like it's Roger Burke. Let me check here. I see Burke, and let's see. Yep, Roger Burke, and he lives in Morrisonville. So Roger Burke's Ford 1950 two-door Deluxe is on display here. And of course, Roger Burke, well known as a manager for Pepsi Cola bottling. He has one Mountain Dew on the license plate. And here's another vehicle owned by a Plattsburgh resident. It's a Chevy. It's a Suburban. It's a 1951. And it's owned by Matthew Stiles. I believe that says Stiles, or could be Stiggles. Maybe I'll show you the writing and you can decide for yourself. Maybe it's Stiggles on Plattsburgh. And it's a truck that, well, I guess we can't tell from this side. We'll go to the other side so I can show you. It's a truck that was spent its life working in Burlington. Shulda Electric. So so it was a vehicle that probably carried electrical supplies, and the repairman would go around and show up at your door with something like this. It's in the process of being restored, but it's still a very nice looking vehicle, and hopefully when they paint it, they'll find a way to repaint the sign that was on it. I'd be ashamed if that were painted over. Now here's a 50 Chevy Deluxe. It's got a little more chrome on it, and it's owned by Richard and Leila Tucker from Burke, New York. Another 1950 Deluxe Chevy. Real time, we'll be getting back to this car show. We've got to take a break right now to document the arrival of the Lozier. Alright, it's been 24 minutes since Gordy departed, but Ron Venn just came dashing over to give me the good news. The Lozier has arrived here at 1234 on June 24th, 2001. So this will be the first time this particular Lozier has ever graced the city of Plattsburgh, because it was made, as Tony Vaccaro said earlier, in Detroit. So let's get it coming out here. And of course Ron Venn is one of those who's most excited to see it, because although he's made those great models, he's never seen one in person, so he's viewing it for the first time in person. And here it is, arriving in Plattsburgh. What do you think, Randy Beach?
First one's a 15 Model T. This is not the car.
This is not it. This is the Model T.
Model T 1915.
All right.
Last of the brass.
That's just in there like you'd have styrofoam around.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
It's just styrofoam to protect the real car.
That's the way I think about Ford, but, but no. That's a nice little car.
It's a 1915 Ford. This is not the Lozier, so hang on to your hats. The Lozier is yet to come off. It's a 2 horsepower here. 2 horsepower 1915 Ford.
Goes all the way up into Maine with those things.
And it's soon to make its entrance here. Here it comes. Slowly making its way toward the back of the trailer. Looks like it's backing out. It's backing out here. This is exciting stuff here on this 24th day of June 2001. I'm still saying 19 here, but it's 2001. Yeah, it looks like there's a clearance problem. Look how high that is. It's a clearance problem for sure. Looks like the 1917 touring car that we saw in Vic West's garage, Vic West and Arnie Beale's garage. That is high. I'm not quite sure how they got it in there. Maybe they built the trailer around it. There they go. They got somebody sitting in it. That'll do it. Look out, don't get run over. Nobody's been run over by a Lozier in Plattsburgh in many a year. There it comes. There it is. It is officially in the open air here in Plattsburgh at 12:40 on June 24th, 2001. What a moment. And we didn't get a hold of Ted Heiner to do the canvas work for the top. Look at the size of those wheels. 37-inch wheels. 37-inch tires here on this. A long ways down. As you can see, it's certainly not restored. It's in a state of restoration. Larry Barcombe is helping out. That's the guy in the center with the white shirt. That's the brother of Owen Barcombe. Larry, a recently retired farmer in, they say Shazy, it's Shazy School District, but actually Owen and Larry grew up in the town of Champlain, and coincidentally where Owen and Larry grew up and where Larry still has his farm is the farm once owned by my great-grandfather, Ed Castine. So here it comes, being rolled out. And here it is in its current state of repair. As you can see, it needs a lot of work. Seats are down. Now those are seats like we saw in that Hudson. These seats will, you can see the thing there, they will fold up. They will fold up and go into the back of the front seat here. So those will actually fold up. You can fold those into the back of the front seat. So when you don't have the need for those extra 2 seats, you don't utilize them. So the people in the back would have more room when those seats aren't being used. But as soon as it came off the truck, it got instant attention. I'm taping, Tony. What do you think?
Come here. Where's Eric? Come here. Ready to go? We've already done 2 hours of taping. Good. This is my friend Eric Edwards. He came down from Baxter, Ontario. I guess got held up at the border, and I think
hijacked at the border.
Hijacked at the border, and the problem is he's been working non-stop. He's had how much sleep in the last week?
Maybe 8 hours.
8 hours in the last week?
Yeah, feels real good.
I pay you too much, you know that.
It's overtime.
It's the overtime. He can tell you about the car. He's the one who's actually been doing all the work on it. Eric, can you tell us a little bit about the car?
Sure. My son and myself and Tony have been working on this project now for about 4 months, and we found this car to be a wonderful car to work on. It's the only remaining example of a Model 82 that we know of. It's a 7-passenger touring car, cast in triples. It's magnificently built. Everything about the car that we've examined is top-notch quality. It was probably the most expensive quality-built automobile in the United States. It's probably a milestone of American ingenuity. We've enjoyed working on the car because it's really the epitome of quality. It's a wonderful car to work on because you find all sorts of details that you wouldn't find on any other cars. As we've been going through every different phase, we've noticed little innovations, big innovations, right down to things that we wouldn't really consider very important, like the locking rings on the tires that would be normal. They were so easily installed and removed. Everything about the car is just top-notch. Now, we put the original leather back in the car so that people could see what the original actually was. Now, our trimmer, who's just been working on the convertible top, is making all new leather seats for the car of the original style leather. The carpeting on the floor, the linoleum for the front floorboards, all the little details. If you look at even the construction of the top, every little depression in the top bow has been accommodated for so that their webbing would not protrude through the top of the material. Now, the topping on this car is going to be a tannish material like you see down here. So this is all exposed and visible from the inside, and the maroon will be complete on the inside.
Let me interrupt you for a minute. I'm going to have to switch tapes here. So those of you watching our little corner, this is going to wrap up this episode, but we're going to also...
Were we supposed to get Paige in on
All right, we're going to get Paige in on this, and Lauren. It's Calvin Castine. We're interrupting our taping of North Country Commerce to bring you this very special event. The Lozier car has arrived just in time here for this great American car show, and we got 3 Vaqueros right here. We'll turn the microphone over to Tony Vaquero, and he can tell us what's going on. Kind of start anew here, because the people who've been watching our little corner, this will be on at a different time. So fill us in from the start here, Tony.
Sure, I will.
Who are these girls first?
Who are these girls? This is my daughter, Paige. Can you say hello, Paige?
Hello.
Paige is 5. And this is Lauren. My daughter is 7.
Hello.
And the girls have been waiting for the car to come home. This is a car that we've had for about the better part of a year now, and it's been a slow restoration project on it.
And we're going to work on it so we can ride in it.
We're going to ride in it. In fact, you see there's little seats in the back for you.
I know what seats are going.
This car is a 1915 Lozier. It's a Type 82. It's the only remaining 82 left in the world. It's the last model that was ever built by Lozier. As you can see, it's quite a large car with a 123-inch wheelbase, and weighs, when completed, it'll be over 4,000 pounds. It has a 6-cylinder L-head engine, the L referring to the airflow through the top portion of the engine. It was a typical design of that era. It's a 6-cylinder. It produces about 45 horsepower. It's considered a 7-passenger car. You can see that there's 2 jump seats in the middle of the car that actually fold forward into the front seat. In relative terms of the cars of that era, this is one of the largest cars ever physically built.
I recently saw a 1917 Hudson touring car, and it looks very much similar with the canvas roof and those folding in seats, and the size is kind of similar. It's very big car.
Well, these are considered very big car, and maybe we have a chance. Can we pull off the leather here and take a look at the woodwork inside?
Introduce the gentleman again here.
The fellows beside me here is my good friend Eric Edwards of Edwards Antique Automobiles out of Baxter, Ontario. He's a second-generation restorer of antique cars. His father from South Africa originally started the business, and Eric and his son now Chris have been carrying on the trade. What we were going to show you here is the inside of the car was actually constructed out of wood. These old cars were built by coach makers, the people who used to build the horse-drawn coaches. I have 2 little girls here. You'll have to have 2 little girls here that are very anxious. This is the first time they've ever seen the vehicle.
Daddy, what do you name the car?
My one daughter wants to know the name of the car. But you can actually see the wood construction of the car, the framework with the springs, and you can get a good look down in here. And the interesting thing about the car, when we found it, we've determined that everything's totally original on it, right down to the wood that you're actually looking at now.
This car was never apart before, so all the finishes on the surface would have been the original right from the factory. So there are pieces of wood that are tacked in place that have never been painted. The original hand-brushed red primer, where they would have coated this where the possibility of getting any moisture on it. Down below, when we cleaned the bottom of the car, we saw that they didn't use a paint, they used actually a stain, which allowed the wood to breathe. So on a car like this, of high quality, you're not going to have any dry rot or any area that's of a problem. They stuffed the inside. This is called tow, which is a variation of horsehair, and this is the stuffing actual horsehair, and it was used on all top quality automobiles, and all the early carriage trade used horsehair. Then they stuffed each of these pockets individually, and that's what you would have in these diamonds. Now, as a 1915 automobile, this would have been at the end of the diamond era, of the diamond tufting. Most of the cars from this period would have already moved into leatherette. The pattern on the seats was only diamond in looks. It wasn't the true diamond tufting like you see in the backrest or in the front rest, where they actually pocketed the leather. So this is a pseudo diamond tufting. It's not really tufting, it's just a diamond sewn. Now down below here, what they did, they used the same grain material but in leatherette. Now this will all be replaced. when it goes back for the top and the rest of the seats. But we'll lift the body back off the chassis to do the finish of our chassis restoration and our engine restoration. The engine runs perfectly. It's probably has less than 20,000 miles on it. We found nowhere anywhere on the car. There's so much. I mean, a car of a wooden construction like this, which was typical from the period, they would have framed the body in wood and then tacked the metal on. Now, this is probably one of the first years what they used compound curves like out in the front, and they were learning how to do this kind of metal work. Previous to this, it was just flat panels tacked on wood framework. It was actually a holdover from the carriage trade. 3 years or 4 years earlier than this, they weren't using metal on their bodies. They were all wooden construction. So the industry changed very quickly to introduce new techniques on better quality, ease of manufacture, ease of refinishing, because obviously when you're buying an automobile, what you're buying is style. In the early years, you're buying dependability or usability, but when you got into something like this, you're buying style. So they offered custom finishes, they offered the ultimate in creature comfort. I mean, obviously, air conditioning meant open air and side curtains. And this car was equipped probably with the finest set of silk side curtains, and we had the example that can be displayed at the museum. Right now they're being used as samples to duplicate for to match the topping. So all the original fasteners like you see here and down the side are where those side curtains fasten to. And these holes here are where the original fasteners would have been so that you could undo those side curtains. So there are a lot of different aspects that you get involved with when you're restoring a car of this vintage or of any vintage. It's very interesting because you see the development from year to year to year.
And since this is a one of a kind, you haven't got another one that you've worked on that you can go by, right?
Can't compare, definitely. We've been very fortunate that all the Lozier owners that we've come in contact with have been very, very helpful. Although we can't compare exact duplicate cars, certain cars from different years have similar characteristics. And the one thing that they all have in common is their absolute top-notch quality. Remember, a car like this was their cheapest offering at around $3,000. 2 or 3 years earlier, they were in $6,000-$7,000 range. And that's probably one of the reasons the company didn't stay in business. Their quality was so high, their expense was high, and the economics just did not work out.
Yeah, we just finished another tape, and we've covered some of the things that I'm going to ask you about here. Mercedes-Benz and Lozier very much in common because they were both the top-notch.
They were the top of the line for the world. In America, it was Lozier. In Europe, it was Benz. And they liken this car to the American Benz. The size, the power, the innovations. In the early years, Benz had all the refinements of a car that was 10 or 15 years newer. With Lozier, they did very, very similar things, and they all looked to each other for ideas. They wanted the best for their customers, and they changed very rapidly. The very earliest Loziers were cast in pairs. Now this one is probably the one of the variants that's cast in triples. So as a 6-cylinder engine, they made their casting procedure a little bit simpler.
Now what do you mean cast in pairs, cast in triples?
This unit here would hold 3 cylinder sections. There's 3 pistons. This is cast as one unit, and it made it easy to do that procedure. The larger the casting, the more difficult it becomes. Because
it's a 6-cylinder?
This is a 6-cylinder. And if you had a 6-cylinder cast en bloc, which means all in one, all the water passages would have to be incorporated into the original design. So there's a lot of things that would hamper the development of those casting techniques. The very earliest cars were cast in singles, then they went into pairs, and then they figured the more units that they had, the better. Well, in 1914, Lozier even had a four-cylinder that was cast in one lump sum, about this big, very, very tall, but cast in one section. It only lasted for 1 year. So they were developing, they were playing with the technology, and they were experimenting. And that's how the industry developed, whether it would be Lozier or Benz or Packard or Pierce.
For the people who are joining us and haven't seen the other tape that we did, and there's people who haven't seen that tape and obviously know what we're talking about, but there's some people who don't know what we're talking about. The fact that Lozier Car Company originated here in Plattsburgh, and it stayed here until 1910 and 1911. It moved to Detroit, and it was there till 1915. Am I correct?
What we can surmise is that production of Loziers ceased around 1916 or 1917. It appears that most all of the parts were made in Plattsburgh, but because of the location of manufacturing plants, in 1910 or 11, the bulk of assembly work happened in Detroit. And it was from Detroit where they took their race car to Indianapolis. But all their the development started here. The manufacturing of the parts was done here. Now, there may have been manufacturing in Detroit as well, but they had a good handle on what they were doing right here, and they had a good product. They didn't need to change that. Just the location of finishing assembly was done in Detroit.
So chances are these castings were made right here in Plattsburgh?
More than likely they were made in Plattsburgh, machined here, and then shipped to Detroit. And that, again, added to the cost of manufacturing the car. So all these external factors influenced the eventual outcome of many different companies. You know, they could make fine products, but the economics was something else in question.
Now, they must have had some sort of a machine shop in Detroit too, because I know from working at a bookbinding plant for 9 years, a lot of times you send a part down and it's manufactured where you want it, you get it down there, it doesn't quite fit.
That's right. Detroit was a haven for machine operations. In fact, at the turn of the century, there was something like 150 different machine shops and foundries working in Detroit, and very, very busy. It was almost logical that Plattsburgh would move their Lozier operations to Detroit to keep up with what was going on. It's just like in the medical profession. You go where the action is. All the developments happen in the big city, and then you take those skills outward and you develop them from there. The manufacturing in Cleveland was earlier than Detroit, and in many ways a lot of people feel that Cleveland should have been what Detroit ended up being. So it's a heavy manufacturing town. It seems that Plattsburgh was just too sleepy a hollow to have a big burgeoning company, although they did for over 10 years. It was a wonderful operation, and they were right on the water. It worked suitably to what they were doing, originally with boats and their motors. But the quality must have been the same on their boats to hold over to their cars.
Now, how about color here? A kind of a burgundy color. Is that the original color, you think?
There were a number of different colors available in the catalog. There were maroons, burgundies, greens, blues. Some colors sedate, some colors more extravagant. Some of the sports cars, sporty models, used lighter colors. But being an expensive car, you could have it any color you wanted. But this is a color that was in the original catalog, and the way that the belt moldings are done is appropriate to the period that the car was built.
Do you know if this was the original color of this car?
This car was originally dark blue. The car was only painted once, and the color that was on the car when Tony purchased the car was almost a baby blue, which was somebody's decision. And we affectionately call it Big Blue, and I think maybe 10 years from now we'll still call this maroon car Big Blue, because we know where the car came from.
Your daughters were asking about the name for the car. Tony, it's got a name, Big Blue.
Well, we might just end up naming it that, but they named the truck that I now have. They named it T-Rex, so I'm sure they'll come up with a name for this vehicle.
All right, for the people who aren't quite aware, tell us the history of this particular car, Tony.
Well, the original owner, we of course don't know, but what happened was there was a fella named Barney Pollard, and he was in Detroit, and he was a contractor, and he built most of the roads in the Detroit region, and including the Ambassador Bridge across one of the rivers. And Pollard went on to have one of the largest, or the largest, car collections in the United States, and it's reported he had up to 1,100 cars by the time we got to perhaps the late 30s, early 40s. And he would pick up old cars. I mean, don't forget, at that time you're talking about vehicles that are only 20, 25-year-old. He would pick them up and put them away. And my understanding is Barney Pollard had a arrangement with perhaps the state government. He was getting a lot of contracts to do work. And I understand, I heard that he had an arrangement, for example, that the work he did, he wouldn't necessarily have to pay state income tax on. And that led him perhaps into the position where when World War II broke out, the government came to him and said, we need the favor repaid. And that is, we want all your old cars. And the reason the government wanted the cars at that time was they wanted the frames for the steel to build boats, and they wanted the brass off of these cars to build casings for the shells for the bullets. And actually, unfortunately, it's what happened to a lot of these antique cars, is they got destroyed for the war effort. Well, Pollard decided he didn't want to give up all his cars, and he took perhaps about 40 of his cars and tucked them away, and he hid them. Apparently, a lot of his cars did get scrapped, but his 30 or 40 cars that were actually very special to him, that he thought were premier cars, got hidden away in a warehouse. And then more recently, in the last few years, his son, Barney Pollard Jr., who's now into close to his 80s, decided to start selling off the collection. And this is one of the cars that came out of the collection. This car has been tucked away for 40 or 45 years.
Nobody even knew this car existed. All the car collectors never knew this car existed. In the Lozier list, this car was never ever listed. So it was a real shock when we found out this car came from Pollard's, because Pollard was a famous collector. Go ahead.
And it does represent really the last of the line of Loziers. I obtained the car from a fellow named Bob Sullivan out of Seattle, Washington, or actually Olympia, Washington. He had obtained the car about 2 years prior. So the car has come to us, and as Eric has indicated, it's got very little mileage on it. It's totally original, and it's in excellent shape, and it's perfect for restoration.
Okay, totally original. Like headlights, how much? Do you have everything you're going to need?
Everything came with the car. That there was nothing missing on the car.
You need just the upholstery and canvassing, that type of stuff?
Just the parts that would deteriorate. I mean, we could have conceivably used the original upholstery, and the top that was on the car was very good. But it had probably been redone. The top had probably been redone in the 40s when the car was painted for the second time. As far as there's nothing on the car that was missing. It was a complete, usable, drivable car, and I'm surprised that the car never came out on tour. But then again, the Pollards were very, very secretive. They kept to themselves. They were very, very influential people, and I don't ever recall Barney Jr. coming out on any old car events, and I go out with the old car group in the Detroit area quite a lot. I remember in the 60s, the Canadian Car Club would take bus trips to the Pollard collection, and they would go through his various buildings and go through the collection of unrestored automobiles that he saved, like Tony was talking about earlier. And the most remarkable part about it was he hung cars up that were smaller around the perimeter of the building. He erected a railway track, like a single girder, that would circumvent the building. And he would hang these cars up by their back end just for space limitation problems. And a number of those cars have come through our shop over the years, and generally the back panels of the cars are all rotten from continual condensation and drying and deterioration. But people are still talking about the collection that Pollard had. I mean, he was one of the great collectors, and he without people like him, these cars wouldn't exist today. Now we have people like Tony that are making it possible to have these cars preserved in the style that they originally came from the factory, and that's marvelous.
Anything else, Tony, that you think, I don't know about this, do you have a target date for when this will be fully restored?
Target date. With regards target year might be with regards to restoration. I learned, or I've actually knew before entering this project, that you can't count on dates. It's just the way it goes. And actually, when we got the car, we originally had the idea, okay, we'll take the car. We didn't like the color. We'd repaint it. And then we started saying, well, if we're going to repaint it, maybe we ought to consider the leather work. And then the leather work moved to the top. And then it just continued on to the point where it went down to its total frame, every last nut and bolt on the frame. So this is a ground-up restoration. We haven't taken the engine apart because we don't see any need to do that. The engine runs fine. Starts up easily. It runs well. So when we're done, we're going to have a nut and bolt museum quality restoration, and we'll have the car here in Plattsburgh for display. And we're hoping to have the car done in September to take it to the old Car Fest out in Dearborn at the Henry Ford Museum. And part of it is to take the car out there and enjoy it, to have fun with the car. But I'd like to take it out there and show it off with a little bit of signage that says, Plattsburgh, New York, and we try to use the car for publicity purposes for the city. We can use it to tell people out there what kind of town we have, what kind of area we live in, what kind of history we have associated with it, and perhaps, who knows, we'll end up moving here. Somebody maybe will help us out here at the Air Force Base and fill in some of those empty hangars.
All right, then one more thing. He said nut and bolt. How much did you take this car apart totally and reassemble it, or how much of it did you not touch?
The body was removed off the car. The engine was taken out of the car. Wheels have been off the car. We've examined all the brakes, bearings. We haven't gotten into the engine as of yet, but when we started the car up, it ran like a Rolls Royce. So obviously, we don't want to mess with it.
It ran like a Lozier.
Better than a Rolls Royce. It ran like a Lozier. We've heard a couple of other Loziers run, and earlier cars have that really guttural racing car sound. This car is a little bit more refined. It has a nice purr to it, very, very quiet. You could probably balance a nickel on the engine block. That's how smooth it runs. So we were thrilled about it because that makes things so much easier for us. And obviously, it makes the project more manageable for everybody concerned.
Of course, you don't tell Tony all those things there. You say, boy, I had a real problem with that engine there.
Yeah, I sat up all night working on it, yes.
It's really nice to have close contact with the person that's making this all possible. And we make all our decisions together. And if there's something that I don't like, I'll tell Tony. And if there's something that Tony doesn't like, we have a discussion about it, and I still win out. So, no, it's one of these things where the decisions are made with the best result in mind. And, economics is not an issue here. We have probably the finest vehicle that Lozier made in 1915. And, we're not spendthrifts, and we don't expect to spend money foolishly. Our time is spent well on the vehicle. And what you see here is probably somewhere around 500 hours worth of time. It's more of a love than anything else. This is probably the most ultimate project we've had the pleasure of working on. We've had a lot of national winning automobiles of all quality or all makes, but this is probably the highest quality, and it's a thrill to work on it.
All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Nothing else? All right. So this chapter will continue. So keep your eyes and ears open, and you'll hear more about this Lozier
Festival in September.
Yeah. And there'll be more chapters on this. So don't give up on this. It's going to be around for a long time, thanks to the efforts initiated here by Tony Vaccaro. So Lozier has returned. Well, actually not returned. It's here for the first time in Plattsburgh, but a Lozier car. The parts in it, the engine,
Yeah.
that were cast there.
We were surprised that there were no other Loziers in the area. Me and Chris, when we came down this morning, we were talking about it. Where did they all go? I know they didn't make a lot of cars, but you would think maybe one or two would have stayed in the area, but not that we know of. Tony, do you? Nothing.
No, we don't know of any other ones. There's one in a museum downstate, but actual driving cars here in the county or the region, three-county region, no. This is the only one.
There probably weren't a lot of people around here who could afford a $6,000 car in 1910, so that might be one of the reasons.
Well, that was a big reason. Most of the cars that were sold out of the area to the very rich people. This was not an everyman's car day.
It's not a Model T.
This is not a Model T. No, it isn't.
This was probably equivalent to about 10 years' earnings for the average person. And back then, that was a lot of money. 10 years. I mean, by today's standards, that would mean this car would have been $400,000 or $500,000. Equating it on today's dollars. Rolls Royces are not that expensive.
No, so that gives you an example, but that was the early days of car manufacturing, and a big piece of American car manufacturing happened right here in Plattsburgh, and we want to thank these folks for bringing it back here. As we said, there'll be more on this in the future, so keep your eyes and ears open. Thanks, gentlemen. Well, it's certainly going to be hard to top the experience of witnessing that Lozier in its first appearance ever here in Plattsburgh. We're going to close out with just a few shots here of some of the other cars, just a couple more minutes, because it's all anticlimactic as far as we're concerned now with that Lozier arriving. And nice as these vehicles are, they don't have the history of Plattsburgh in their blood. I mean, that car, the parts were manufactured right here in Plattsburgh. The Lozier Car Works started here in Plattsburgh from the Lozier Bicycle Company, then the Lozier motorboats, and then eventually into cars. So it has a very unique North Country flavor to it. So anything else we look at, just because of those reasons, cannot compare. So we do want to take a look at some more of these vehicles. They're very nice Nash here. It says 1937, and we'll see where the owner is from in a moment. The owner is from Quebec. It's looks like Marcel Bauderger, and it's a 1937 Lafayette Nash. There's a Dodge 1931 Mike McCasker, it looks like, from Keysville. Owns this one. Here's a 1935 Chevy sedan. Michel Poisson from Hemingford, Quebec, is the owner of this one. We've been here for about 4 hours now, about 4.5 hours, so we're anxious to get out of here on this Sunday afternoon. So we're going to be wrapping it up with just 2 more cars. This says Dodge Brothers vehicle. It's a Dodge Brothers, or Dodge 1924 edition. It's a sedan. Tim and Lisa Fitzgerald from Jay, New York. We apologize for not spending the time on these that we'd like, but again, we are looking to go to a family picnic that we're about 3 hours late for already. Now this is a 1904 Oldsmobile Ron Pickering from Montreal, Quebec is the owner. And as they talked about the Lozier. These are descendants, of course, from the carriage. So these very early automobiles in particular are made by carriage makers. So they have a lot of carriage features because obviously they replaced the horse and buggy, the carriage. So we're going to wrap it up with this look at a 1904 Oldsmobile. And it's only 97 years old as we're looking at it. So next year, plan on attending yourself. This is being taped on June 24th. I will assume it would be around the same weekend, graduation weekend for many of us. So graduation weekend next year. In future years, next year you can look for the 4th annual car show here, and it's usually, I think it's always been here at the Park Oval, sponsored by the Plattsburgh North Country Chamber of Commerce. And you can find something that's sure to pique your interest. There are a lot of food vendors and other flea market type vendors around, so you can come here and make a whole day of it. Even if you got someone in your family who's not particularly interested in vintage automobiles, you can certainly find something to do. Any car show that has 3 1957 Chevys in it has got to be a good car show. So that's it. Thanks for watching North Country Commerce, a weekly look at the business community in and around the Plattsburgh North Country region. For Gary Douglas, who is out roaming the grounds with his family today, this is Calvin Castine saying thanks for watching.
Got